Hey everybody, it's Mr. Hasquin, and I'm back with another episode of Things You Should Know by Being Alive. Today it's the Boston Tea Party. When it comes to the Boston Tea Party, it's not just about tea, it's about power, it's about protest, and it's also about a government that stopped listening. So by the time we get to the early 1770s, there's a tension that exists between Great Britain and the American colonies, and this tension starts to boil over. Now, colonists have endured the Stamp Act, they've endured the Townshend Acts, and they've also went through the stationing of British troops in Boston. Parliament kept saying to the colonists, we can tax you because we rule you. But the colonists were saying back, you can't tax us if we don't have representation in Parliament. Give us a seat in Parliament, give us a voice, and then we can talk about the taxes. When Britain repeals most of the Townshend duties, they kept one, and that one was the tax on tea. The message was, yeah, we're listening, but we're still in charge. Then came the Tea Act of 1773, which didn't raise taxes, it actually made tea cheaper. Now, the difference here in the Tea Act is that it gave the British East India Company a monopoly on tea, and it cut colonial merchants completely out. And now the colonists weren't mad about the price of tea, they were mad about the principle. It comes down to, well, control. And so this leads us to the eventual protest. So in Boston, we have resistance leaders like Samuel Adams. And Samuel Adams was part of a group known as the Sons of Liberty. And they just weren't going to have this. And so we have 3 tea ships arriving in Boston Harbor in 1773. They were the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver. And when these 3 ships arrive, the tensions finally just, they explode. So on the night of December 16th, hundreds of men, many who were allegedly disguised as Mohawk warriors, boarded the ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea leaves into the harbor. It's about 90,000 pounds of tea in monetary, so it's about $1 million worth of tea today. Nobody gets hurt. No personal property other than the tea was damaged. They even swept the decks afterward. So it wasn't a riot. It was a political message that was disguised or dressed as theater. So, how does Britain react to this? Well, Britain, the crown, was furious. So in response to this, Parliament passes what are known as the Coercive Acts. But the colonies didn't refer to them as the Coercive Acts. The colonies referred to them as the Intolerable Acts. And so as a result, we have the closure of Boston Harbor. We have the dissolving of the Massachusetts colonial government. Now, if British officials are brought up on charges or crimes or accused of crimes, they're not going to be tried in Massachusetts. They're going to be transported out of Massachusetts and tried elsewhere. And it reinstates something known as the Quartering Act, where soldiers could be placed into private homes. So this just wasn't a punishment. It was an attempt to make an example of Boston, and it backfires. So instead of isolating Massachusetts, it actually united the colonies together. And by 1774, colonial leaders were meeting together in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. And they were basically laying the groundwork for independence. Now, not everyone's on board for independence, but there's rumblings. So the Boston Tea Party didn't just spill tea into the harbor. It also just spilled out loyalty to the crown. So the legacy of the Boston Tea Party becomes a symbol of civil disobedience. It's the idea that when a government oversteps, the people have the right to resist. But it also showed how nonviolent action could make a massive statement. No guns were fired, no one died, but the world heard splash. So in the decades since, the phrase Boston Tea Party has been invoked by activists. It's also been invoked by politicians in different movements. Sometimes accurately, sometimes not. But anyway, the original event It was a bold event. It was organized, and it was a warning. You know, ignore the people long enough, and they'll find a way to be heard. So, if you happen to enjoy the story here, or if you learned something new today, please like or leave me a comment. Follow along for more things that you should know by being alive. Because sometimes the most important revolutions can, start with a cup of tea. Thanks a whole lot for watching.